Okay, 3, 2, 1, here we go. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you're all enjoying the program of talks and sessions that we're having today. There's 2 more left today. This one, which is an Ask Me Anything session. Welcome, Régis. This Ask Me Anything session, the format is really basically you ask us any question about Qgis, and we try our best to answer it. We are assembling a panel of experts. Maybe you could just go around the table and introduce yourselves quickly.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Ujaval Gandhi. I'm based in India. I run an academy called Spatial Thoughts, where we do trainings on QGIS, Python, and Google Earth Engine. And I've been involved with the QGIS project for a while. I write QGIS tutorials and also publish free course materials on QGIS and spatial analysis. And happy to answer any questions related to QGIS or anything else that really comes to your mind.
Thank you. And Régis?
Hey, hi, everybody. I'm Régis Haubourg. I'm a French guy living in the French Alps. And I'm involved in QGIS funding at start a long time ago, and then I worked with some developers in France for some years, and now I'm back in the public sector, and I'm a guy doing geomatics and QGIS and Postgres, but GIS, and I'm involved into the French local chapter of the USGO, and we are supporting the Qgis French user group there.
Thanks, and we'll be joined just now by Jorge, Gustavo, Rocha, who was just showing us how to do ODM point cloud and aerial photography. I guess he'll be along shortly. If anybody from the Qgis community would like to come and help answer questions, please pop me a note and I'll share you the link to the Jitsi room and you can come and join us. You're welcome. We do have a collection of questions that have been submitted already, and if you have more questions that you'd like to share, feel free to just put them, I guess, in the YouTube live stream chat or into the Telegram room, on Twitter, or on the form that I originally shared. I'll try to pick them up from the different places. If I miss something, I'm sorry, just maybe give me a pointer on the live chat and I'll go and try and find them. I should have introduced myself as well. I'm Tim Sutton as well. I'm going to mainly play as host for this session, but maybe I might try to answer something as well if there's something I know about. Yep, so let's dive in. The session will be for two hours. So just a continuity note that at about an hour, the stream will probably cut off because Jitsi stops the live stream after 1 hour. So if you're watching, just stick around. We'll restart the stream. It will take a minute or two. And if you're one of the participants on the panel, don't panic if you see something hear something that says stream stopped. We'll restart it again in a second. Okay, so let's see. We can dive in. We've got a list of questions here. We can start from the top. The first question I got was from Hans van der Kwast, who's a well-known Qgis community member. And he wants to know if there's a way in PyQgis to generate a temporary raster in memory. I know that you can do this in GDAL, I think, but can you do it in PyQgis? Processing tools write an actual file to the temp directory and load that. So he's just wondering if it's possible that instead of writing it to a temporary file, you can actually do it in memory, and maybe it might be more efficient in this way. Do either of you have any thoughts or knowledge about this?
No, I looked up a little bit since this was a question that was submitted, but I couldn't find a way. I think processing temporary files are actually actual files on the system. So it might be possible, depending on what you're doing, maybe just to create like a NumPy array, keep your raster as an array, and then take it to the next step for the next step. But I don't think there is a way to have a temporary file in memory loaded as a layer in through PyQGIS. At least I've not found a way.
Okay, There's unfortunately not always a yes answer to everybody's question, but we try our best to find answers for you if there's a way, but sometimes it just can't be done. The next question is from Luis Eduardo Perez, and he wants to know if it's possible to access and use the .qix file of a shapefile layer through the QGIS console. He's looking at the spatial index file that gets written next to a shapefile. Can we use it? He doesn't give any specific example of what he wants to do with it. I guess to start the answer, I mean, QGIS will automatically use that file anyway, but I don't know if any of you have experience trying to work with those files.
No, at least what I know is when you create a spatial index on the layer, shapefile, it just puts the file there, and if the file is there, QGIS will just use it, and same with PyQGIS. So I don't know why one would want to read it, and I don't even know what's the format of that file and why would you want to read the spatial index file. I think it would be just easier to just create a spatial index through a processing toolbox, or just create a new spatial index through PyQGIS for the layer.
Régis, have you had any experience?
Yeah. No, nothing better. You can access the special index classes in the code, so Qgis is only the storage of it, but when you work with the shapefile, it's in memory, and so I don't know what's the specifics of this question, but I'm not really a developer, so all the questions we have are really technical, so I hope I can be
so maybe some technical people in the Telegram room listening to these questions, you're welcome to jump in, and we invite you into the panel here if you want to help those ones. But yeah, I think it's we need to know what you're trying to do as well, because maybe there's more to the story than just accessing that file. But, and don't be afraid. You can ask the technical questions. We might not be able to answer them, but we will try. Let's jump to the next question, which is, where should I begin to refresh enough on QGIS basics and more likely to be able to use drone footage in QGIS? Well, I think we kind of answered that question 1 hour ago. If you look in the program for the day, I took a beginner course in college, but haven't kept active with working with QGIS since then. I'd like to become more actively engaged again. Any advice? So there's a few bits of that question. Maybe we can dig into different parts of those.
Yeah,
maybe Ujaval, you want to? Yeah.
Sure. I spend all my time just thinking about how best to learn QGIS and how best to teach QGIS. So I can give you some pointers. One way to, I don't know about drone footage specifically, what are a good learning resource, and we shared some of those today about working with this data. But I can share if you are looking for kind of just refreshing on knowledge, I can, let me share my screen. I can suggest a few resources that I've shared. So this is the qgistutorials.com that I've been writing. This is a collection of 40 tutorials, which are step-by-step. And you could just begin at the top and just work your way through all the 40. And that will give you kind of a good understanding of how QGIS handles things, how to do all the GIS tasks. And all of this is using open data. And it's also translated into 10 plus languages. So you can also learn those from there. And that's a good free resource to start. Another resource that I kind of spend a lot of time creating is this course called Spatial Data Visualization and Analytics. And this is kind of teaching QGIS, but from a perspective of not teaching QGIS. It's from how do you deal with different kinds of spatial data, how do you view them, how do you analyze them, and just uses QGIS as a software. And this is a completely open, free course, and it goes through some of this, how to view drone imagery and how to visualize some satellite data and so on. So maybe just look at this course here. We'll put a link on the chat here or in the description later, and then just you can work through this. It's all the data, everything is just completely open, and you can work through that. There's also the QGIS documentation, and there's a training manual. So I know Tim wrote most of it. So but it's also a really good walkthrough of all the different things on that QGIS can do. So there's also a really good resource to just start learning about resources. And depending on your learning style, there are a lot of YouTube videos. I know Class does an excellent series of videos. So if you prefer videos, you can use that. If you prefer more text-based material, you can use that. And I would just say, the best way to learn is just to take a problem and start solving. Whenever you get stuck, look for help. Look, there are, on Stack Exchange is a really good place to discover answers to previous questions or ask questions, and just go from there. So that's my advice.
We lost you, Tim. Your microphone.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, there are actually so many learning resources around that. I think the problem is not, are there resources, more just which ones and how to find time to go through them all. And there are some very good YouTube videos. If you watch anything by Klaus Carlson, he's amazing. He does really fantastic things. Also on Twitter, you might want to follow, just search for Qgis, and there are quite a few people that tweet amazing cartography and other things that give you inspiration and ideas. So don't have to only look at traditional learning materials. Welcome, Jorge. And but going to docs.qgis.org is probably a good starting point, just to find some, the official inverted commas materials. And then I think there's also the Qgis Academy from Kurt Menke, that he's written a lot of excellent materials. And there is also, if you go to Locate Press, maybe somebody can put the link in the chat room. They have some amazing books as well, and they're all open, open source community members usually that are writing those books. And Locate Press, incidentally, is run by Gary Sherman, who started Qgis as well. So you're also supporting Gary, who actually started the project. All right, so the next question, somebody named Robin said, I'm very novice at this and I would love to learn some ideas on creating a Qgis plugin. So where should they start? Maybe so you want to dive in there, Régis?
How to find some ideas to create a plugin? That's a nice question. I faced this in some training sessions where the team had no idea what plugin to code, but they asked for a training. And very often it's a good moment to get out away from the computer and discuss around the coffee with your teammates and really think of what could help you in your workflow, in your team, in your organization with the plugin. It will have many good side effects, like learning the inside of Qgis, learning GIS in a general way, and help you find the moment where you need a real developer. And I have no special trick about it. Just imagine, and first thing, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Many plugins already exist. We have too much plugins and there's dispersion and redundancy. So the first part is do your homework and just audit all the plugins you see, do some researches, and then you take some parts. And very often the best idea is to not create a plugin, but mostly create algorithms to do the data treatment part. And then the Qgis plugin, my advice is to mostly focus on the user interface part in the plugin. But most of the time, you don't need a plugin.
Just explain for people who may be not so familiar the difference between those two things, between a plugin and creating a processing algorithm.
Yeah. In the past, in the Qgis 2 era, when you wanted to add a new data treatment, so you only have data inputs, you want to mix it, do some things, buffers and whatever, distance calculations and all this, and you have outputs, and you embedded this into a plugin. There was no way to share this algorithm, this input and output part, to other plugins in QGIS or other part of QGIS. So there was no mutualization of the work. So now we advise to split your work into data treatment in one place. This is the algorithm place, and this will fall into the geoprocessing toolbox. And you can share it with some platforms, resource sharing platforms, for example. And you can do a plugin that will add some user interface, nice screens and windows and buttons. And you also can use your plugin to deploy the algorithms you have in it, so to make the packaging part easier for the user. So this is a very nice approach to avoid redundancy in data and the data toolbox we have now. And this is maybe why we have so much more algorithms available now, because it's much easier to do only an algorithm. It's easier to learn the Python part. You don't have the user interface part to learn at start, and then you do in a second time the rest of the plugin.
Yeah, I completely agree with Reggie. And I typically, when people ask, I just say, don't start with the idea of building a plugin. Maybe you don't need a plugin. Figure out what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And there are so many ways you can customize that in QGIS. Many people just want to have a workflow that they want to automate. Maybe just build a model using the processing toolbox, and that can automate your workflow. Many plugin ideas that I've heard require some action to be taken where the user clicks on something. So I click here and something happens. So Qgis Actions are really great. I tell people that most of the plugins can be a few lines of Qgis action. And if you're not explored actions, I suggest you just search in the documentation about Qgis action. They're really powerful. And if you need to do something where the user clicks on a feature or clicks on an attribute and something should happen, that can be coded with just a few lines. And there's already a user interface element around it that QGIS provides. You don't need to kind of build a plugin. And the next step is, if you need something completely new, start with a processing script. And the processing script, as Reggie said, it takes care of the user interface. You just say, I want an input of type vector. I want to take an input of number and then generate a new vector layer. And you just say that, and the user gets a standard user interface. And you just code your logic. And then if you really need a plugin, is where you need to distribute your script to other users, and that's where you can add a button on the toolbar or a menu item that launches that script for your users, and you can just ship that as a plugin. So I would say first figure out what the problem is, and then learn and figure out where you want to do it, and then learn the relevant PyQGIS to do this. And the documentation for PyQGIS is actually really good. There's the developer's cookbook, which has sections on each thing. If you want to work with vector layers, look up the section there. You'll find examples there. But I would say just start with the problem that you're trying to solve, and then go from there.
Yeah, we have someone in the chat in YouTube mentioning the plugin builder plugin. I would not recommend to start with this. I did it, and it's too much for learning process. You have, I think that the PyQGIS cookbook is a good way to jump in, and you have a very raw plugin, bare plugin example in the Martin Dabias repository, I think, that just put only takes the core, the very core, so that you get very well how Python classes work. And then you can add the documentation, the translation, which all comes in the plugin builder, and it's too much at one time. And it's maybe a bit late a bit under-maintained also. So sometimes it's the make files are not accurate. So to me, it's too much to use this plugin builder. But when you know what you're doing, you can use it to go fast and make your plugin in one day.
Okay, thanks. Anything to add, Jorge? You're just nodding your head.
Yeah, I think I echo everything. I teach a PyQGIS course, and in that course, I tell the exact same thing. Don't use plugin builder. First, learn the minimal plugin template that Régis mentioned. I just have people start with that, just to know what a plugin really is, and it's nothing but just some init files and a metadata file that puts your entry of the plugin there, and once you know what it's doing, and then it's much easier for you to code, because I've taught a few courses where I just say plugin builder, and then when people do this and say, okay, great, now I want another button, what should I do? And then they get immediately stuck there because they don't know how the plugin works and what happens. So I think it's best to start with a minimal template and go from there if you really need a plugin. And I just see plugin as a way to package and distribute your work. It's nothing very different than what you do with other things like a processing script.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's move on to the next question then, unless any more comments. So the next question is from Parul Jain. I hope I pronounced your name even vaguely correctly. He says, request, ! I want to make a web dashboard with attribute query based on dates to see growth trend. I don't have a programming background. I have used Qgis to web plugin. I got your mail from Twitter. Okay, so I think this question is a good example of being part of the open source, is that if you want help, you've got to ask questions in a way that people can actually have a good chance to help you. So, I mean, I guess we could kind of figure out a few things from your question, that you want to make a web dashboard. But really, if you really want to get good help, provide a small sample data set, for example, maybe make a mock-up of what you're trying to see, because I'm just using this as an example of, I know Ujaval also gets a lot of questions in his email box, and I try to help people as much as I can, and there's questions coming in the mailing list, and the community members are trying to help you as much as we can, but we often can't help you because we just don't get the question written in a way that we can make sense of what it is that you want to do. So I don't know if there's any more we can answer for him. Maybe you guys would like to try, give some suggestions, but I thought it'd be nice to just illustrate the importance of writing well-crafted questions. Especially, I'll just maybe make one more comment, that your question, if you only spend 1 minute on it, but you expect me to spend 1 hour answering your question, it's a bit of an unfair exchange. I think it's much better exchange where you spend an hour writing a question very carefully, really work it out, and then I can answer it in 5 minutes, because I've got a lot of people I'm trying to help. And if I have to spend an hour on every person, I can only answer one question a day or something like that.
Yeah, I can just give more, even I don't have a good answer to the question, but I think what the question is that, I did something using the Qgis to web plugin. I have a web map, but I want to customize it further. I want to add some interactivity to it. I want to do something more to it. And, without programming, how can I do it? And I don't know of a GUI way to do it. The Qgis to web plugin is great, but it exports a static map mostly. And if you want to add more interactivity, you need to learn JavaScript. And you need to learn, if you're using Leaflet or Open Layers, you need to learn those libraries and say, how can I make it interactive? How can I, make it click and show a chart or something like that? So I think you have to now start learning programming, and it's a good stepping stone. You have a web map, see how it's working, go and say, I want to add this to it, learn that bit of JavaScript, learn a bit of Leaflet or Open Layers library, and start building on that. And if you get stuck doing that, post that question carefully, like Tim said, say what you've done, say what's the error, and put a screenshot and ask on Stack Exchange. There are experts on web mapping who will be happy to help you.
Yeah, and I would just add that it's also good to understand the different components. And QGIS in this set is work as a web server, a web map server. So web map servers do not provide dashboards and so on. Although we have a very nice experience with dashboards on the QGIS side, the QGIS server does not expose this as something. It's not on any kind of protocol. So I think this is more related with web development than a problem with QGIS server or something that we can do in QGIS server.
True.
Thanks. Maybe we can just dive off our script quickly and take some questions that have come in the live chat. So there was one just about GDAL, and I saw, Régis, you were commenting on it, and so Tom Chadwin asked about the future of GDAL and Qgis. Is Qgis somehow vulnerable for depending on GDAL? Maybe you want to talk a little bit about Tom's comment and question, Régis?
Yeah. That's a pretty human topic, and it's about sustainable economics of our open source ecosystem and free ecosystem. So yesterday we saw something I probably should call it the burnout syndrome of the open source developer. We all rely heavily on our libraries underneath, GDAL, Proj, and those libraries are maintained by very few people that are doing awesome, giant work, and we have mainly 2-3 active committers on those projects, and most of the great stuff that are done in QGIS come from there. So what we've seen yesterday is that Evan Ruo just closed his Twitter account and took a break. And this is pretty frightening because he is the main maintainer of GDAL, and we have to understand what happened. And we foresaw this kind of things some years ago already. I don't know if you remember the OpenSSH scandal. There was a flaw in this very critical library for the whole world, and everybody just saw that one person was maintaining it, and it was a problem. So the open source nature of it made it resilient. Somebody took the code and fixed it very fast. But we have a problem to fund those guys that are doing this underground work. We don't see as QGIS user, we don't see what they are doing. And for the OSGeo world, Evan Ruo is one of them. He's not alone, but he's doing awesome work. And in the last months, we've seen very big corporations, those very, very big corporations like IBM and SAP and all this, pushing some nice piece of code into GDAL, into QGIS, for instance, DB2 database providers, or a HANA database for SAP, and so on. We've seen many examples of this. And this is the learning of the open source ecosystem for those big actors. They start to invest in it, that's a good thing. But they learn that contributing to open source is not only giving some code and then go away, because we have to maintain this. When it breaks, when you have to change the QGIS API or GDAL API, they are not there anymore. And they didn't fund either QGIS.org or the OSGeo. And we've seen this issues which is how to fund sustainably this work. This is a critical question for me. I'm part of the QGIS user group in France, and I didn't want to make a QGIS association. I wanted to be into the OSGO local chapter, so that part of the budget we have from Qgis, because it is shining, it has a massive user base. We want to push some of this money to the underlying projects like GDAL, like Proj, like PostGIS. We rely on them a lot also. And the main question is how the big corp really contributes directly to this project, and how we can do better to fund this from the OSGO, from Qgis.org association too, but our budgets are really limited compared to those massive amounts they have in, and the SaaS model, the online service model we have from Amazon, we have from all those big players. They are taking the money from the bureaucratic part of informatics, and they are pushing it to somewhere else. It's very similar from what we see on the Elasticsearch thing, going not open source. And why is that? It's because the SaaS model is just draining the soul of open source and letting those projects die. So I think we are in this period where we all have, as in our corporation, in our public organization, we can't let people think that open source is free. It is free for freedom, but it's not free for money. It has a cost. It's making the people working on it live sustainably. And we all have these moral obligations to spend a bit of money to sustain those projects, either Qgis.org, EOSGO, and
or spend a bit of time. Your time is a good currency.
Or resources, or give service on them. But yeah.
It's like we were talking about the question just now. This exchange. People spend a lot of time at, let's take Qgis, for example. A lot of it has been funded by clients, but also a lot of us donate a lot of our free time to make it work. And we don't ask you to pay anything, but it would be great if you exchange back some time into the project, even if it's just fixing a bug or reporting a bug, or helping to improve some documentation, or promote it, or write some tutorials, or whatever you can do. And everybody, is always saying, "Oh, you should contribute," but we feel like we kind of banging a drum all the time, saying contribute, but it's really difficult to get across to people that everybody can contribute, and you don't have to be something special. You can be dumb like me. I think, like I always say, enthusiasm counts a lot more than intelligence in open source. Like if you're enthusiastic and you're prepared to spend time, you can achieve a lot, and you don't have to be the smartest guy on the planet. Although, of course, if you are the smartest guy on the planet, we also welcome you to help us. And I think, I'm worried about the same thing in Qgis. We have a few people that do a lot of hardcore bug fixing and work, and we try within the structure of the project to fund their time. But I also know that sometimes people will come along and say, "Oh, I don't like the way you did things," and that person spent a lot of their own time, as a volunteer building it, and it's quite ungracious to come along and say, "I don't like the way you did things," if you don't have a proposal and a funding or an investment in time that you're prepared to actually improve the situation. So you should try to motivate people and not demotivate them with your interactions in the open source community. So on the plus side, I guess the model of open source means that, just going back to the original question, the GDAL, Google, burnout. I perfectly understand what burnout feels like. A lot of us have been burnt out by doing open source things, but the open source model is kind of quite resilient to if somebody disappears, the source still exists, and there are often people that come in and step in and can help continue the work. So much less resilient than a proprietary vendor just pulling their license. And for example, if we relied on some proprietary library for data IO and they said, no, we're not going to let you use it anymore, we'd be in much deeper trouble than we are ever likely to be with an open source library. Okay.
May I add something, Tim?
Yeah.
I think it's also a lesson for us as a QGIS community to guarantee that we have new blood and new people coming in and new contributors and so on. We are here for so many years. We already saw this happen in other technical projects that starts to becoming smaller and smaller with a very deep know-how of the things, but are not able to communicate and are not able to capture new contributors and so on. So, for example, I think in QGIS, we need every year to have a number of new committers and so on. As far as I remember, Luigi was the last one to have commit rights or something in an event. It was a few years ago, but it was really nice to see the community claim someone, a new committer. We have to discuss this more in our community to make sure that we have always new blood on the team and learn from this lesson from Ujaval and from others.
We need to have a next QGIS Open Day, maybe an under 25s panel or something cool, and just like get rid of us old guys. Sorry, I'm sorry to call you guys old, but maybe some younger looking people that got some fresh ideas and maybe different perspective on things. The Instagram view of QGIS rather than the Facebook view. Yeah. Okay. Shall we go on to the next question? This one is from Wendy Adrian, and he says, I think you called me Chris, but I'm Tim, but that's okay. I think I called somebody else Chris the other day, and they were actually called something else. So I'm no saint in that department. Just curious how to convert raster data to ECW format in QGIS. I've searched on the internet, but it looks very complicated to use the Erdas Imagine library. So who wants to field that one?
I can comment. ECW is a proprietary format, and they provide the SDK. So you have to use QGIS is not distributed with support for this format, neither Ujaval. So you have to compile Ujaval with this SDK, and if you compile Ujaval, it will be used in QGIS, and it's quite easy. But this is also related with the proprietary formats, and to deal with these formats, we don't have any way to incorporate this in QGIS. It's something that you have to do by yourself to have a version of Ujaval supporting this format. And it's complicated, yes, but it's the vendor that makes this more complicated, and our humble suggestion is to move from these proprietary formats to open formats.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, so QGIS can read ECW. The problem is only writing, I suppose. I think the QGIS does ship with the support for reading ECW rasters. Just creating those, and you need that SDK and you need to compile things, and because it's a closed source format.
And just take careful note of the license restrictions, because you're only allowed to use it as a write engine in some limited ways, I think. And for reading, you also may not publish on the web. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I may add that most of the imagery vendors and satellite launchers are now switching to the cloud online TOT format, the COG format. It's not much bigger, and it's really optimized for this, and it's open standard, and it's supported from the very beginning by Qgis through Ujaval, and kudos to Evan Rowe who worked on this. So I don't think we need ACW anymore.
I guess the problem is that we may not need it, but a lot of people have large collections of ECW data, and it's not so trivial for them to switch it to something else.
But Ujaval is really good to do this in batch. So you convert once and forget it.
Yeah.
My teammate yesterday burnt our computer just converting CW to GeoTIFF.
Did you say burnt?
The computer, yeah.
It caught alight?
It died.
I thought you said burnt, and then I thought maybe my French accent parsing was not good, but okay. Okay, so maybe we jump on to the next question. So don't use ECW if you can help it, is the answer for that one, I guess. In Qgis, Pavel Hort writes, in Qgis I have 3 tables connected via relations by ID. One has, and the others do not have geometry. I want to highlight in each table those rows that are linked to the object that I mark in the map window in any table. So I guess since we only added this now, we probably need a little bit of time to prep kind of questions like this. Maybe, again, if linking to a little data set would have helped a lot when you're asking the question. Does anybody want to take a stab at trying to make an example on the fly, and we can come back to the question in a few minutes maybe? Or should we keep this for the next time and ask for a sample data set to come with it?
I think there is already a video demonstrating this. There is a plugin. I think this is select from relation, or
I think it's from Matthias, the one.
Yeah, maybe we should find it. Try.
Okay, maybe you can have a look, do your Googling while we carry on to the next question, and then come back to that if we can find something. So the next question is from Jigme Tenzin, and he says, is there any plan to include an iterative function in the model builder in Qgis? That one sounds like one for maybe Ujaval.
Yeah, so I know from the past discussions that there have been discussions to kind of that it's a missing functionality where in the model builder you can't iterate over a certain layers, and I think that in the past whenever people have asked, I think the workaround is to write a bit of PyQGIS script that can do this, and you expose that as a processing script and include that. It'll be nice to have this built in. I don't know of the plans. I'm not plugged into the developer discussions, but if somebody in the chat, if Niall's there, he is, if his plans for doing that, or if there are any plans for including that in the future.
And maybe we could also mention that I think if you run the processing model independently of the model builder, you do have it, right? You can iterate over, there's a little green arrow. We can pull that up in a minute, but it's really just in the model builder that you don't have it.
Yeah, I think this is useful where you need to iterate over a layer that's generated during some of the intermediate steps, and you may want to do something. So I think that's something that you generally have to script it. But I think ArcGIS has this iterator algorithm where you can just drop the algorithm and does it. So I think Jigme is asking if QGIS can support something like that.
Mm-hmm. So I also haven't heard of any active plans to do that, but maybe Niall Dawson would be the person to ask if you want to fund his work or help him do it. He'd be the guy to ask, I think. And then the next question is from David Fox, and he's asking, have there been any discussion of incorporating Python Jupyter notebooks into Qgis? I think Jorge had some ideas about that. I also can tell you about some discussion that we've had before in the past.
Yes. There have been discussions around this issue. but I think right now we have a nice support to incorporate QGIS in Jupyter, and that's why I think we are not discussing this so much lately, because it's really easy to incorporate QGIS in Jupyter. I will share my screen just to show this. So call it the COVID. So is my screen already there? So for example, with my students, I ask them to do exercises in Jupyter, but also with a component, a geographic component. And to make this work, they have to use QGIS. And these notebooks are regular notebooks, but in the cells you can write Python and PyQGIS, and the renderer will use QGIS to produce the render. And for example, these notebooks are rendered automatically on GitHub, but sometimes GitHub is not so good to display them. You can use online render like this NB viewer. But for example, this is in Portuguese, but it's the same. The code, it's in Python, so you can read the code. But to include QGIS in your Jupyter is simple as import these classes in Jupyter. And if you are using a standard QGIS installation, this is enough. In Windows, you might have to tweak the Py3 bat or something like that in Windows. But afterwards, or I also have instructions here. If you compile QGIS by yourself, QGIS will be in a different path. So you have to set this prefix path to SR local, for example, and to set the plugin path. But afterwards, you can do things like creating vector layers, add layers to maps, iterate over features on tables and so on, and even to get the images. So you can create, for example, this is generating a map and goes to QGIS map settings and so on, and you have these render parallel jobs that will render the map and will create an image that you can include in your Jupyter notebook. So we are not including in QGIS Jupyter or having this as a panel in our QGIS, which might be a more tight integration between QGIS and Jupyter, but at least we are making QGIS available in Jupyter developers, and for playing with the geographic component, this can be used in Jupyter.
Yeah, that's an awesome demo. I think it's going, many people have asked me this in the past, so I'm going to point them to your notebook and your GitHub repository to have a look at that. So it's a really great resource. Thank you.
We also discussed in the past the possibility of a different workflow, which is where you have Jupyter Notebook inside of QGIS. And there were a lot of technical complications, basically is the short answer. But it would be lovely to be able to, for example, open the QGIS Python console and have a Jupyter Notebook in there that control QGIS. But the difficulty, for example, like moving back up, I don't know how you do it on your notebook, but if you move back up your process, your steps in your process, how to get QGIS to return the data you just deleted in the previous step, or these kind of things. And I think there are also some other technical issues with the Python GIL and the way that it lives inside of QGIS. It's difficult maybe to implement it. So I think your approach is the better one, which is to have QGIS used inside of Jupyter rather than trying to use Jupyter inside of QGIS. Okay, some more questions from the live chat. Barbara I've been challenged all day by names. Now I think you've got me. Barbara Wozniak is wondering about the appearance of Qgis on screens in higher resolutions. For example, 3,840 pixels by 2,160 pixels. I can enlarge the font and icons, but the window closing crosses of the windows themselves are strangely scaled. I remember when the high DPI screens first started coming out, Alessandro Pozzotti he bought a Dell XPS 13 or something, I forget what he bought, and he made a lot of fixes for that, but I think some of those issues are still underlying in Qt about the way that it handles scaling, or in your desktop. I think if you're on Linux, it's doing not too bad a job now, but I don't know, on Windows and other platforms. Does anybody have any knowledge or thoughts on this?
It's called champagne problems for these rich people with very nice displays.
Yeah, get a worse display is the solution to that.
No, it's not the solution, but unfortunately, I don't have these IDP displays. No experience.
Yeah, I do have an iMac, and I did try QGIS. It's not my main machine. It's my wife who uses that. So I just installed QGIS and I tried it, and it seemed to work okay on that high DPI screen. I didn't notice any major issues. So, but I don't play around with that on a regular basis. So
I think on Mac they use pixel doubling or something though to so that they don't actually, if the application doesn't declare itself as a high DPI app, they double up the pixels. So you don't get the issues really, but you're also actually effectively using it at half the resolution of the display, or a quarter of the resolution. I think the issue may be on Windows, I don't know. And it used to be on Linux, but again, I also don't have a high DPI display, so I can't tell you what it's like at the moment. Okay, maybe we move on. There's a question for Ujaval. Can we use the network analysis in hydrology analysis in the city, like drainage networks and vulnerability analysis for urban flooding or inundation maps?
I would say the kind of network analysis that's used in the urban setting is most commonly on the water utility network for planning the water flow and such. I think for hydrological modeling, there is a different types of analysis, but it's not really a network analysis. And those typically work on the raster side versus the network analysis that I talked about today, and using the graphs that is all on the vector side. So I'm not sure what is the question exactly, but I've not seen for flood modeling and stuff network analysis being used for on the vector side.
Yeah, it's very same thing. I just want to underline that the strength of QGIS is that it works openly with other tools. You can do most of the work into a database if you want. I have a former colleague of mine. He had done a whole hydrologic model into Python into a PostGIS database, and it was all the stored procedures there. And QGIS was really dumb. The database was doing it all. Or you can connect an external model, and don't try to reinvent the wheel, because don't lock yourself too much to Qgis, because it will be a big monolith in the end. Just put things apart and then make them talk together.
Okay, next question is from RP. He wants to know if there's anyone out there that convinced colleagues to move from commercial software, for example, Esri, to Qgis. How did you convince them, and what was the transition process like? I never tried to do this before.
That's my experience. Yes, I can speak for hours on this. There is a big human factor. Why do they stick to proprietary software? Because they learned it, because they feel security, they have a security feeling because there is a big corporation. There are many reasons why they like it. And what I like is just do GIS, show it works, show you have a great online community support, and show that in the end, when you lack something and you contribute to it because it really blocks you, you have it faster this way than the commercial way. You can contribute a few thousand euros to fix something, and you will have your whole workflow combine QGIS, Grass, PostGIS. You can do so much more things with open tools. And I've had a customer that told me that they had largely enough money to work with that American company. They had this. And in the end, what made them switch was that the very, very last bug blocking them was not solved for years by the American company. And the whole GIS, they had forced their information system to adapt to the software. When they pushed open source libraries and software and QGIS Server and PostGIS, they just adapted the open source tools to their workflows. It's really the opposite. And when you analyze the costs for a company of changing your whole information system because you bought something that is very closed, it's a lot more expensive. So that was the main reason. Not ethics, not freedom. It was just pragmatic approach, which is fairly new. The big actors coming to open source for 4 or 5 years now, they are not coming with ethics first, but efficiency first. So that's a good reference to discuss with them and convince.
Ujaval, do you want to add some comments?
I'm pretty bad at kind of pushing people to do something. So I'm not had success, telling people, hey, use QGIS is better. I've had more success where it's more on a pull basis, where people say, I'm really frustrated with the restrictions. There are not enough licenses in an organization. Maybe this tool doesn't do what I need to do. Can QGIS help? And I think if people have come with the mindset, it's just much easier to tell them and have them adopt QGIS. So I don't know. I'm not a very good. I don't have a very good answer on how to convince somebody or push somebody to do it. But there are the ways where I've seen people switch successfully is that there are restrictions around the proprietary closed source software that they don't like, and they really need to do something. Either use it in a way that requires too many licenses, or that there are not enough resources available to get more licenses, and then they need to have a more open source solution, and that's worked.
Jorge, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think my way to convince people is always if you know your problems and if you are willing to solve your problems, you move to open source solution that you have more possibilities. It's not a way to switch from one. No, but if you don't want to do nothing, no, don't move to QGIS. You just move to an open source when you are willing to do more and willing to do things better. Like Régis said, I think we are just giving an opportunity to people, but people will move if they want to move. It's up to them, not up to us. We're just providing freedom and ways to do things in different ways. And since we are so many people thinking about things, I think our common intelligence are making the things better than just one company behind one software. But we are giving just an opportunity, so they will move if they want.
Yeah, I'm on board with you all. I like when I look at my past, I was very how how can I say, opinionated open source person and used to tell everyone, you're bad, you're the devil, you're using proprietary software or whatever. And I definitely changed my view in the last 10 years or so of this. And I really don't think like that. I really did a lot of self-examination of what it's like to be a good citizen in open source. And for me personally, I'm like an enthusiast of technology. I like to see what people build, and I actually like to use all the platforms. I like Windows, Mac, Linux. I would happily use Esri if I had the money to buy the license or what have you, just to see what they do. I mean, I used it in ArcView 3.1, which is 20-something years ago, and I don't even know what it's like anymore. So as a GIS guy, it would be interesting to see, oh, wow, they can do some cool thing or something like that. But I always just tell people that it's a value proposition. It's not about joining a philosophy. So you look at the work you're trying to do, and you look at what
live streaming is on.
So I think we're back. Hopefully, if you're in the chat, you can just tell us if we're back yet. So I think when people start to ask questions for me, like how can I force my employer to change software or something, I don't really like that kind of avenue of thought. I rather say like, imagine you're like a very muscular person walking down the beach in Venice Beach or wherever, and you really show off this like fantastic physique. Somebody might come up to you and say, wow, how did you get those big muscles? And then you can tell them, well, I use this exercise training regime or something like that. You can see I'm an example of that. But so then, then you kind of like, what I'm trying to say is you can show off, like you can demonstrate, do something amazing with open source software that maybe people get enthusiastic to come and try it themselves. And rather than trying to push them, rather than dangle a carrot and say, look at this amazing stuff we can do, and be kind of like a nice example of why people might want to be involved. And it's the same, not only the software, but the community. I mean, we really pride ourselves in Qgis to have a nice community, and we put a lot of work into making a nice community because we want to attract people to come to our community, and we want to make it a nice, friendly place. So we can all help by just being like a bunch of nice people that make it exciting and interesting for people to come and participate in the project and use it and know that they'll get help, or just a friendly pat on the back, even if we can't help them. Yeah. So
Ujaval mentioned another question.
yeah, Ujaval, you wanted to jump to a different question?
Yeah, I think Leonard Uma had a question. How can we automate grid intervals in a map, given a map scale? If you make a map at a specific scale, how can grid intervals change automatically? And this is the power of QGIS with the data-defined overrides. So I'll just show you, I kind of just quickly, created a layout, and I can show you how you can do that. So the question is, how can I have a grid interval that changes depending on the scale? So here's a map, and there's a grid here. And for the grid, there is a interval here, the X and Y. And a static interval, or you can have a data-defined interval here, which you can add an expression. And there's a variable called map scale here. So now if you put that map scale, this is the current map scale, and you can have some interval that is based on that. Then as you change the map scale, your grid interval would change automatically. You can see the grid interval change here. So just using the expressions and data defined overrides, you can use the map scale variable and change the grid interval. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And then we had another one here from Milaim Silka, and he or she says that in the latest versions of QGIS, it is seen that the CRS database, the Coordinate Reference System database, has been populated and updated, and the special reference system ID of these databases has taken the 9-digit values we create a layer with the CRS auth ID, like for example 9141. That SRID has a 9-digit ID, and then we will be trying to import this layer in Postgres. We have errors because it does not accept the ID with greater than 5 numbers. So do you think they can correct this issue and so that we do not have to manually update the database? There are currently over 3,000 rows in the spatial references system database that have values over 9,900, 99,000. What is it? 998,000. So does anybody know the technical details about this?
I don't remember the details. I remember facing this issue a long time ago. I thought it was fixed. So maybe it's just an old PostGIS version. If it's not, I'd like to see the details in a bug report. But I remember in France we had the French National Mapping Agency holding its own CRS registry, and the IDs were not compatible with the maximum limit of PostGIS ID. The range was exactly this issue, and I have to dig. How we solve this.
Thank you. And maybe we're running to the last question. We can finish a little bit early. That's also fine. So Drew French asks, what is the future of mesh creation within QGIS? I think we need to have Martin or Saba back. As far as I know, there's not any way to do it at the moment, and I don't know if there's any plans to immediately add mesh creation support. But isn't it from Point Cloud that we can create a mesh as well? But I think actually there is some in the processing toolbox. There is some. I think it goes the other way around. I think it goes from mesh to raster. I don't think we have the opposite direction. Yeah, there's raster to mesh to raster, but we don't yet have raster to mesh. So I don't know if there's anybody got a better answer about that. If there's no further comments on that, I think we maybe have reached the end of our questions, and we'll maybe finish a bit earlier. We have one more presentation later today. That's going to be the iCandy presentation, because Hannah Domida is going to show us a lot of beautiful art made using QGIS. So if you're tired from watching all these presentations and you want to just sit back and relax and just watch some nice mappy stuff unfold before you on the screen, come along in about an hour, just under an hour, and watch the last presentation today. And that's it, I think, unless there's anything else to add from around the panel. We'll call it the end of the session.
Yeah, I think Tim, you deserve a nice 30-minute break after the long day.
Yeah, I need to eat a sandwich. Something.
2 sandwiches.
2 sandwiches, yeah. I did my scheduling wasn't the best because there was no breaks in the whole day, and I had to sit here the whole time. But I wanted to pack as much as we could into the day, so it was all good. So yeah, but thank you everybody for joining the panel and for the talks you presented earlier, Ujaval and Jorge, and hopefully we'll see you back again in the future QGIS Open Day. And thank you also, Régis, for joining us, and likewise, we'd like to see you again on one of these open days. Yeah.
Good to see you.
Okay, then.
All right, thanks.
Au revoir,
Bye.
ciao, goodbye.